One of my channel members asked if I could make a video for beginner makers about the cost-effective equipment and ingredients needed to set up a home lab. At this point, my channel is really geared more towards experienced makers because there are already plenty of channels focused on beginner-friendly DIY and starter lab setups. These days, I spend my time going deeper into formulation, troubleshooting, and the why behind building better products. But I appreciated the question, and I thought that it was worth covering this topic from a more formulation focused angle instead of turning it into another starter kit video. From time to time, I also get questions about why I use so many ingredients in my formulas. And the answer is pretty simple. I'm not formulating for the shortest ingredient list. I'm formulating for stability, preservation, compatibility, performance, and user experience. I don't teach 3 to 4 ingredient beginner recipes because simple is not the same as well formulated. Once you're working with water, surfactants, actives, texture goals, or a shelf life expectation, a formula usually needs more support. That can mean chelators, preservatives, humectants, emulsifiers, rheology modifiers, solubilizers, antioxidants, pH adjusters, and sensory modifiers. Those are not the extra fluff. They're just often what make the product actually work. So the real issue is not whether a formula has too many ingredients. The real question is whether it includes everything that it needs and nothing that it does not. And if you want to become a better formulator, let me just say this right up front. You do not need a room full of ingredients like the ones that you see behind me here. I've been doing this for over 24 years, and I used to have a full-blown retail business across the United States and into Canada. So what you see here was built over a really long period of time. That's not what you need to begin your own journey. The problem is, though, is that a lot of people think that better formulas come from having more stuff, more ingredients, more gadgets, more everything. And that's just not true. When you start that way, you usually waste money, you crowd your workspace, and you still end up with formulas that are inconsistent or poorly built. So in this video, I want to walk you through the cost-friendly basics that actually matter if you want to formulate smarter at home and start building better products from the ground up. A lot of people think becoming a better formulator starts with buying more stuff, more ingredients, more tools, more trendy raw materials, more containers, more everything. But more stuff does not automatically make you better. In fact, it usually just makes things more confusing. What actually helps is having the right basics in place. You need tools that let you measure properly, ingredients that serve real functional roles, and a setup that helps you stay organized and consistent. Because if your scale is off, your notes are a mess, and your ingredient choices are random, your formula is going to reflect that. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. They're not necessarily failing because they can't learn formulation. They're struggling because they're trying to build good products on top of a shaky foundation. So before you worry about having a giant inventory, you need to make sure your basics are doing their job. When you skip the basics, you end up wasting money fast. You buy ingredients because they sound exciting, not because they fill a real need in a formula. You collect tools that look professional, but they don't actually solve the problems that matter most at the beginning. And then the bigger issue shows up. Your products start coming out inconsistent. Maybe one batch feels different from the next. Maybe your texture is off. Maybe your preservative system is weak. Your pH is wrong, or your measurements are sloppy. At that point, it gets really hard to know whether the problem is the formula itself or the way it was made. That is how people end up frustrated. They think they need more ingredients, more expensive equipment, or some secret trick when really they need a better foundation. Without that foundation, you are not building with intention. You're just guessing, and guessing gets expensive. So in this video, I'm going to keep this practical and cost friendly. I'm going to show you the basic equipment that actually matters, the core ingredient types worth keeping on hand, and the kind of simple setup that helps you formulate more confidently at home. This isn't about building a massive ingredient wall. It's not about trying to copy somebody else's lab. And it's definitely not about making you feel like you need to spend a fortune before you can make something worthwhile. The goal here is to help you start with the things that truly pull their weight, the basics that improve safety, accuracy, consistency, and decision making. Because once those pieces are in place, everything else gets easier. You make smarter choices, waste less money, and build formulas from a much stronger starting point. Now that we've covered the basics, the real point is this. A better formulator is not the person with the biggest ingredient collection. It's a person who understands what they have, why they have it, and how to use it well. Once your equipment, your core materials, and your setup makes sense, formulating gets a whole lot less overwhelming. You can make cleaner decisions, you can troubleshoot more intelligently, and create with a lot more confidence. So next, let's walk through the actual basics I think are worth having if your goal is to formulate smarter at home without wasting money on a bunch of things that you just don't need. So now let's walk through the actual basics, starting with the equipment first. The very first thing that I would want in any home setup is a good digital scale. This is one of those things that really does matter. If your measurements are off, your formula is going to be off. And that affects everything downstream, from texture to stability to preservation. The first one that I showed you is just a real small one for smaller batches. And then, of course, I've got this larger one. This goes to 0.1 grams. The smaller one goes to 0.01 grams. But that's the very first and most important thing in your home lab setup. If you're doing soap batches, this bigger one comes in handy for larger batches. So if you're going to spend money anywhere, this is one of the smartest places to do it. Next, I would want some heat-safe containers or beakers, and these are what you're actually going to use to weigh, heat, and mix your ingredients. They come in various sizes. I have like from 1,000 milliliters going all the way down to 5 milliliters. Now, you don't need all of this. You can buy these relatively cheaply, I think, like in a set possibly of 3 or 4 on Amazon, and this is good enough for you to get started. And no, you don't need a giant collection. Like I have a giant collection. You don't need that. A few practical sizes are enough to get started, especially if you're working in small test batches, which we all should be doing anyways, regardless of how long we've been doing this. So that's exactly what I would recommend in the beginning anyway, is just, a variety of a few practical sizes. After that, spatulas and basic mixing tools. I have a variety of different mixing tools here. You don't need all of these. I would absolutely recommend a large spatula and a small spatula. Also, I would recommend a very small spoon. So when you're getting into your powdered ingredients, it's very easy to just get a little teeny bit of powder on your spoon and weigh that out with your scale. But nothing glamorous here, but they do matter. You need tools that let you stir properly, scrape down your containers, and move ingredients around without wasting half of your batch on the sides of your beaker. I also included some pipettes, very, very important for when you're taking your liquid ingredients out of their containers and or your fragrance or essential oils. Get yourself some pipettes. I have glass stirring rods. I don't use them. I don't like them. Do what you'd like there. I do have a set of different sizes of these silicone smaller spatulas. You'll see me using these in pretty much every single video. This is a must for me. Okay, so next, a thermometer is another basic that earns its place really quickly. Temperature affects the melting, combining, cooling, and sometimes when certain ingredients should be added even. So even in a beginner setup, guessing is not a great habit to build. If you want to make lotions, creams, or anything that benefits from better mixing, a immersion blender is something that I would strongly recommend. Now, you don't have to get something like this. This was extremely costly. I had to save up for quite some time to get this. You don't need this. Go to Walmart, Kmart, if you have a Kmart near you. All of ours are closed here. A Target. We have a place here called Ollie's Outlet. That's where I used to get most of my stick blenders for only $14.99, or just go on Amazon. They're relatively inexpensive. It doesn't need to be expensive. It just needs to help you get a smooth, more uniform mix than hand stirring alone. Then there's pH testing. So once you start making products where pH matters, like cleansers, lotions, toners, gels, or anything with acids, I would absolutely want you checking it. pH strips can get you started. This is a really easy and inexpensive way to get started. But a pH meter is better if you plan to keep going. You can't control what you're not measuring. And then there's the basics that people love to overlook because they're really not exciting. Gloves and alcohol for wiping down your workspace and your tools. Also, labels, a notebook, spreadsheet, or some type of a batch record system. Those things may not look impressive, but they are part of what helps you get repeatable results instead of random results. And I do want to pause here and say this clearly. You do not need a wall full of ingredients and equipment like what you see behind me in my videos. I've been doing this for over 24 years, as I've mentioned, and I used to have a really large retail and wholesale business. So what you see behind me, it was built over a really long period of time. That's not what you need to begin. In the beginning, the goal is not to look like you own a lab. The goal is to be accurate, safe, and consistent. All right. So now let's move into the ingredients because this is where a lot of people start spending money way too fast. The first category that I would want on hand is a humectant, and glycerin is one of the best beginner examples. It's affordable, it's easy to find, it's widely used, and it teaches an important lesson early on. A simple ingredient can still have a real impact on how a formula feels and performs. Another good humectant example is propylene glycol. It's a good beginner ingredient because it does more than one job. It can help with moisture, improve formula feel, and support the overall performance of the product. So it's one of those practical ingredients that teaches pretty quickly why multifunctional ingredients matter. For oils, I would keep it simple. Sweet almond oil is a really good beginner example because it's easy to work with, it's familiar, and it gives you a clear idea of what a basic liquid oil contributes to a formula. It helps you to start understanding emolliency without making things too complicated. And if I wanted to show a good beginner ester example, it would be C1215 alkyl benzoate. It's a great beginner ester because it helps show how much sensory can change with just one ingredient. It can make a formula feel lighter and less greasy, and that's a very useful thing to learn very early on. I use layered ester combinations in more advanced formulas, but this is a nice, simple starting point for understanding what an ester brings to the formula. If you want to start making lotions or creams, then you're going to need an emulsifier. A very beginner-friendly example is glyceryl stearate and PEG 100 stearate, also known as Lotion Pro 165. I like it because it's reliable, it's commonly used, and it helps beginners learn how a real emulsion is actually built. Emulsifying wax NF is another good example, or Polo Wax. They work for the same reason. Both of these are more straightforward starting points, which is exactly what a beginner needs. This is not the time to make emulsification more complicated than it already is. For thickening, xanthan gum is a really good beginner thickener because it does more than just make a formula thicker. I have xanthan gum clear and xanthan gum soft, depending on what it is that I'm formulating. It can help build viscosity, improve flow, and in some systems also support stability. And once you move into creams and lotions, that's where ingredients like cetyl alcohol and cetyl alcohol start coming in because these help add body and structure to the emulsions. So we've got cetyl and cetyl alcohol. Those are your fatty alcohols. For preservation, Liquid Germal Plus is a very beginner-friendly preservative because it's easy to use and it's broad spectrum, which means it's designed to help protect water-based products against a wide range of microbial growth. And just to be clear, vitamin E and rosemary oleoresin extract are antioxidants, not preservatives. And grapefruit seed extract is not a reliable broad spectrum preservative. That does not mean that vitamin E does not belong in your lab. It absolutely does. I keep it on hand as an antioxidant to help support oils and oil-based formulas, but that is a completely different job from a preservative. So let's not get preservative confused with antioxidants. They are not the same thing. When I was new, I believed a lot of that natural DIY messaging too, because I didn't know any better at the time. Moving on, for a chelator, disodium EDTA is a great example because it helps bind up unwanted metal ions that can get into your formula and cause problems behind the scenes. That can mean oxidation, discoloration, instability, or extra stress on your preservative system. So this is a great example of an ingredient that teaches beginners an important lesson. Not every useful ingredient is there to be exciting. Some of the most important ones are there to support and protect the formula as a whole. If a brand new maker wanted to make some cleansers, I would not send them off to buy a huge pile of surfactants. I would rather see them start simple. Excuse the writing on all of my bottles. That's what I do. Cocoa glucoside, okay? That is one approachable example. Another simple starting point would be decylglucoside with cocamidopropyl betaine, okay? So that gives you a basic way to start learning about cleansing, foam, and mildness without drowning in too many variables at once. Those three surfactants, cocoa glucoside, decylglucoside, cocamidopropyl betaine. So moving on to pH adjustment. Citric acid is something that we should all have on hand, or make yourself your own solution, which I always do. But this is a good beginner ingredient to keep on hand for lowering pH. But pH adjustment does not always mean going down. Sometimes it means bringing the pH down, and sometimes it means bringing it up, depending on the formula. The important part is understanding that pH is something you measure and control on purpose. So the reason that I like all of these examples for beginners is not because they're trendy or impressive. It's because they are approachable, they're cost friendly, widely used, and each one teaches you something important. Glycerin teaches you humectancy. Sweet almond oil teaches you emolliency. C1215 alkyl benzoate teaches sensory difference. Lotion Pro 165 and emulsifying wax teaches emulsification. Xanthan gum teaches viscosity. Germal Plus teaches that preservatives are not an option. Disodium EDTA teaches support system thinking, and your basic surfactants teach cleanser structure. Citric acid teaches pH control. So that's really the point of a beginner setup, not to own a little bit of everything on the planet, but to own a few things that actually help you understand how formulas work. Because once you understand function, you make better choices, you waste less money, and you build your lab with intention. So as I ask in every video, what did we learn today? Becoming a better formulator is not about having the biggest stash, the fanciest setup, or a shopping cart full of random ingredients. It's about understanding what actually matters, starting with the basics and building from there with intention. And that's what this video is about. It's becoming a better formulator. It's not just about setting up a beginner lab. So a small, well-chosen setup can teach you a whole lot more than a pile of stuff that you don't really understand yet. And honestly, that's where you save money. You avoid being overwhelmed, and you grow your skills in a way that actually lasts. So if this video helped you, go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and share it with somebody who's trying to build a smarter home lab setup. Thanks again for hanging out with me today at Creation Station. I'll see you in the next formulation.